So my topic today is on Hawaiian tourism. And my question is tourism in Hawaii developing in a sustainable way? And while you write that down, I'm going to give you some brief facts about Hawaii. First off, Hawaii is for sure one of the most beautiful states. Not only is it in the middle of the ocean, but it's also an island paradise with towering mountains and raging waterfalls. There's a lot to see and take in Hawaii. Almost 10 million people visited Hawaii in 2018 alone, and that number is actually constantly growing. And that's mainly Americans. Hawaii is one of America's favorite tourist destinations. And 1 out of every 10 citizens works in the tourist industry in Hawaii. So 1 out of every 10 locals in Hawaii works as part of tourism. And tourism makes up 20% of Hawaii's total economy, which is also growing. It's becoming more and more important to Hawaii's economy. So the negatives of tourism in Hawaii. Some islands see more tourists than others. As you can see by this figure here, Oahu makes up almost 50% of all of Hawaii's tourism. And this may lead to island resources being strained and developing unevenly, because Oahu, as you can see, is not the biggest island, actually the big island, coincidentally, which is only about 14% of the total tourism. So Oahu, taking most of the tourism, its resources are being demanded more than the big island, which has more resources. Tourists are also taking away housing opportunities from the locals, because it's a lot more profitable to rent your house out to, say, a tourist than to a local. So the housing market in Hawaii is constantly rising because of this, and making it harder for locals to find good housing. And the environment also is something to consider, especially the ocean, which is the main reason why people come to Hawaii. As more and more people come, there's a greater risk for pollution, especially since Hawaii is such a small place in the middle of the ocean. And there's also the problem of tourism becoming Hawaii's main and only way of making money. Because tourism is kind of a risky business, especially as we've seen with the coronavirus, it could become a bad thing for Hawaii to put too much investment into tourism. And the safety of locals could be sacrificed for tourism gains, which is also referencing to the coronavirus pandemic. There's a quote right here that says, "The people who live in Hawaii have embraced wearing masks. We hope visitors to Hawaii will adopt the same approach in order to keep everyone safe." Hawaii has just recently, within the past couple weeks, allowed people to come to Hawaii with a coronavirus test if they test negative. And many people in Hawaii feel that this is too soon, they're jumping too soon, because many of the restaurants in Hawaii have already said they're not going to be reopening ever. And Hawaii suffered a lot because of there's no tourism coming right now. And so many feel that the local population is not being taken into consideration when they're opening Hawaii to tourists again. There also are some positives. Tourism builds infrastructure like freeways, highways. It provides jobs for the natives and those that live on Hawaii. As already mentioned, 1 out of every 10 citizens works in Hawaii, and that also circulates the money around. Most of the money coming into Hawaii is from tourism. Travel brings new money into Hawaii's economy. Tourism also provides natives with unprecedented opportunities. The new money can provide better schooling, more schooling opportunities, and just opportunities they wouldn't have had before. And tourism also shows and spreads island culture, which isn't really like a huge positive, but it is something to definitely consider. As you can see, most of these reasons are for economic, and then I have a short video here.
I've been obsessed with belts for a long time. I wear a belt every day, and there was like 3 things that I would show me.
Given day. And what about Hawaii?
It's getting crowded. Last year, the state of Hawaii set a record for the number of visitors. In Maui alone, 2.6 million arrivals, and the numbers keep growing.
Ellie Cochran grew up in Maui, and for the past 8 years, she's been sitting on the West Maui County Council. She works to find the balance between the positive economic impacts of tourism as well as the problems it can create.
I deal with the impacts to, say, our wastewater, our solid waste, recycling issues, trash issues, roadways, and water balance and we're not overtaxing our ocean. We're trying to keep that healthy and thriving because it's multi-billion-dollar industry. Then why visitors come to Hawaii is our beautiful white sandy beaches, the tropical fish in the ocean. So many of our lives are impacted positively to pay our bills, to raise the kids, to send them off to college and buy homes.
So what she really highlighted was, what she really highlighted was the positives that it brings. As she said, like raising the kids and the family. Like a lot of the people that live in Hawaii, their lives are dependent upon tourism and upon the ocean and sea. That video also goes later. It kind of showcases both sides. It later goes on to talk about how many of like the marshes and like all the things that make Hawaii so beautiful are being like paved over, and like resorts are overcrowding the beaches and buying up all the beachfront property and stuff, which is also definitely something that we should also consider. So in my opinion, something must be done to protect Hawaii's native population and environment. It's such a unique place and so many people depend upon it and live there that something must be done to protect it. The native people should get priority over all tourists, particularly in housing. Hawaii has recently started to restrict Airbnbs and home vacation rentals to protect the housing market. Because that video, they talk about how this lady runs a restaurant and she's having a hard time finding people that can work in her restaurant because most of the new generation is moving off the island because they can't afford to live there anymore, partly because of the high housing costs, but also now food and everything else is becoming more expensive, and it's becoming harder to make a living and to live in Hawaii. There should also be less private beaches and more public beaches for all to enjoy, not just those staying at a particular resort. This is kind of a positive for both sides, for tourists and locals, because there's a lot of private beaches now in Hawaii as they build these big mega resorts along the beachfront property. It's becoming harder and harder to get to the beach. But now the locals' favorite surfing spots are becoming taken over by all these resorts. So the state should buy more land for public access to the beaches. And Hawaii must maintain a market to stay economically prosperous. I'm not saying that we should that tourism in Hawaii should totally stop. As I've already mentioned, tourism in Hawaii is like super important to the island and to its people. If we were just to take out all tourism, Hawaii, it would be a disaster for Hawaii. With 21% of its economy gone, it would be a disaster. And it's also important to take consideration that it's not just an island; it's a way of life. Many people's families have been living on that island for generations and generations, all as far back as you can imagine. And so we need to take that into consideration. It's not just a place to make money. It's not just a place to build a resort. It's people's livelihood and their family's livelihood that's at stake. So the plan, not only does Hawaii need to change, but we do as tourists. Whenever we choose to travel, we should always choose activities, lodging, and activities that don't negatively affect the locals or the environment. This is definitely something to take into consideration. Whenever you travel anywhere, to any location, you should always think of how is this going to affect the local population and how is this going to affect the environment when choosing to do any activity or staying anywhere. Hawaii should also look into other economic activities that are less risky and more everlasting. So now with all this money, Hawaii should find ways to invest in other things that are more sustainable for the island. Locals and tourists both share the responsibility of preserving Hawaii. It is as much of the locals' responsibility as it is those who visit, as I've already said before. We as tourists need to take that into consideration. And Hawaii state officials need to look into the environmental impacts of tourism. That video also highlights a lawsuit filed by an environmental group against the Hawaiian Tourism Board, citing that they are not taking into account environmental impacts when they are promoting tourism around the world for Hawaii. And so that's definitely something we can take into consideration. And there's our bibliography.
Thank you.